everybody, it's Sarah, and today it is time for me to talk about all the books that I read in March. Although before we actually get to talking about the books, of course I have to start with talking about my stats and also talking about what I'm currently reading, just so you're up to date and maybe already know a little bit what you're gonna expect from my April wrap-up. But starting with the stats, I'm of course once again going off of the stats that Storygraph gives me. I read a total of 9 books in March with a total of 3,767 pages, so quite a bit. My moods were adventurous, mysterious, dark, reflective, and tense, so you know, not on the light-hearted side. In terms of pace, 22% of the books that I read were judged by Storygraph as being slow-paced and 78% as being medium-paced. I apparently didn't read any fast-paced books in March, so that's interesting. With page number, 22% of the books that I read were under 300 pages, 22% over 500 pages, and the rest, so 56%, were between 300 and 500 pages. I once again read only fiction in March, and in terms of genres, Storygraph gives me fantasy, romance, historical, LGBTQIA, magical realism, young adult, science fiction, literary, and horror. Then 6 of the books that I read in March were print formats and 3 books were e-formats, so e-arcs or e-books from the library. And lastly, in terms of ratings, my ratings weren't that great, to be honest. In March I had an average of 3.38 stars, with 2 2 stars, 1 3 star, 2 3.5 stars, 1 3.75 star, 1 4.25 star, and I still have 1 5 star, however. So I do have quite a few 5 stars already for this year. And then the last stats I want to share once again are the inclusivity stats that Storygraph doesn't give me, but that I just, you know, think about by myself. And for that, I would say that March wasn't that great for me, to be honest. Out of the 9 authors that I read, only 2 authors were BIPOC. However, 4 of the books that I read featured BIPOC characters. In terms of queerness, 4 of the books that I read included queer characters. And in terms of mental health or disability, I think 2 or 3 of the books that I read this month included characters that were neurodivergent or had a disability. So that is it for my stats. Now let's talk about my currently reading. First book that I'm currently reading, I have it down here. Ithaca by Claire North. I mean, technically I did already finish this. However, I finished it in April, but before I filmed this. But at the time when March was over, I was still currently reading this. That is what I'm talking about. Then I am also currently reading Harrow the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, and another book that I was still currently reading when March was over, but at this point I have already DNF'd, is Tolerant by C.J. Sparrow, which is an e-arc that I got from the publisher. So that's in terms of currently reading, and now let's get into the books that I read in March. And as always, I'm gonna go from the book that I enjoyed the least to the book that I enjoyed the most. So in terms of the book that I enjoyed the least, let's start with my 2-star reads. The first I have is Prisoner of the Iron Sea Tower by Sarah Ashe. This is the second book in the Tears of Artemis series. The first book starts when the king of this country up north, this very cold country, dies. That is a problem because the king is kind of the ultimate protector of this country because he also has this demon being inside of him. And so his people go and look for the king's son. That son does not want to become the new king, and so they go ahead and kidnap him. And that is kind of where the story starts, where the son has to find out what actually killed his father and also has to deal with now having a demon inside of him. So there's multiple reasons why I don't really like these books. I'm gonna read the 3rd book still because I do own the 3rd book and it's kind of fun shitting on this book, so I'm probably still gonna read the last book. However, reasons why I don't like this book: I don't like the characters. I especially find the female characters incredibly infuriating. I don't know how else to describe it, but that they feel like they were written by a man. They are absolutely useless. Every single character is just stupid. The world building just does not work, especially because the distances are just, they do not exist in this series, and it's just, I wouldn't recommend the series whatsoever. I'm probably gonna do a full rant review once I'm done with it, but yeah, I actually don't want to talk about this anymore right now. My second 2-star book that I had this month was actually another e-arc that I got by a publisher, and that was The Thick and Deline by, I forgot the author's name, Jana Porter, I believe. And yeah, this book had a really interesting premise, because basically it's set in this world where society is very fundamentally religious, and very Christian coded as well. And so society believes that to be closer to God, you're not allowed to eat. So basically no one's eating in this society. I mean, they are eating, but you know, they're trying not to eat. And also, before going into this, I would look up triggering content, especially when it comes to connections to eating disorders, if there's anything that triggers you. But anyway, we basically follow 2 characters that live in this society but that don't fit into this society. Now, I think the concept of the story is really interesting, and there could have been a lot done with that, especially when it comes to commentary of how we currently live in a very consumerist society as well. Not that consuming in and of itself is bad, but I would have thought that maybe they could have, or the author could have put in some interesting juxtapositions there. Yeah, that wasn't the case. Then there was also some weird things that just didn't fit together for me, because on the one hand, yeah, they didn't eat because, you know, you have to hold back constantly, and it's just this really big thing with self-control, and that's why not eating brings you closer to God. But on the other hand, everyone was constantly having sex, and like sex was seen as something very positive, but in a way where not having sex was seen as something negative. It was just really weird, and for me just did not make sense internally within the world building. I don't know, there were just multiple things that for me didn't fit in the way the story was executed. Maybe there was just something missing for me, because obviously I did not really grow up in a fundamental Christian surrounding. I grew up in a Catholic surrounding because Austria is Catholic, so it's just everywhere, but my entire family is at least agnostic, so you know, it's just, religiosity is not something that I usually connect to, and so maybe that experience was just missing for me to connect to the messages of this book. I don't know. So I ended up giving it 2 stars anyway. So next I have my 3-star book, which was The Restless Truth by Freya Marske, which is the second book in a series that I think is called The Last Binding or something. I read the first book last year, and you know, I gave it 3 stars last year as well, but I'm a completionist, so once I start a series, I have a really hard time DNFing that series. I probably am not going to read the 3rd book in the series anymore, to be honest, because overall, the thing that I have to say about this series is it's meh. It's a historical fantasy romance series set in like Edwardian times, I believe, like around the turn of the century, if I remember correctly. And in England, or internationally as well, but it's set in England, you have this secret society of magicians and of people who can do magic. And there was this thing called The Last Binding, or The Last Contract, which is this thing that could give magicians a lot of power, and so bad people want to get that, and the people that we follow want to stop those people from getting those contracts and those bindings and that tool, that magic thing, basically. And so in each of the books we follow 2 different characters, and each of the books is a queer romance at the center. The second book is Sapphic, so I did already enjoy it a little bit more than the first book. I thought it was, like, chemistry wise, I enjoyed it more than the first book. I can't say that it was because it was Sapphic or not, to be honest. But anyway, while I did enjoy some of the sex scenes and some of the smut in this book, the rest was kind of whatever. You know, it wasn't bad enough that I would DNF it, but it also wasn't anything special. That's pretty much all that I have to say about the series. Maybe my issue is that I just, like, I tend to not enjoy very romance-heavy books. I'm not a fantasy romance reader. I prefer romances to be more of the side plot or the subplot and to stay in the background, but yeah. The characters also weren't overly interesting. I might pick up the third book because I think one of the central characters in the third book was the character that I so far have enjoyed the most, but who knows? We'll see by the end of the year, I guess. Also, I just remembered that I forgot to talk about one book because usually I start with my rereads, obviously. However, so far I haven't had any rereads this year, so I forgot that I did that. But I did have a reread in March. That is what I wanted to say, basically. And that was Shadowfell by Juliet Marillier. This series was what I pulled from my series TBR chart in March or for March. However, I did not get around to picking up the second book because it's currently really expensive and the website that I buy all my used books from doesn't have it currently. So we'll see when I can continue on with it. But this is YA high fantasy and we follow a young girl who has abilities that have been forbidden in her realm by the king, and so she goes to look for rebels because she wants to join them, because she wants to help bring down the king. And yeah, I just really enjoyed it. It's like early 2010s fantasy, YA fantasy vibes. It's fun, I enjoyed it, and yeah, I think if you like those types of vibes, I can recommend it because obviously Juliet Marillier's writing is stellar. Continuing on with my 3.5 star books. First, I have Crowbones by Anne Bishop, which I believe is the 8th book in the Other series. However, the main Other series is 5 books and then there's 2 spin-offs, and this is the sequel to one of the spin-offs. I hope that makes sense. In the Others, you basically have an alternative universe to our world somewhat, where you have humans and you have the others. The others are vampire shifters, they are also elementals, they are beings that are just very primordial, is that the right word? And they are way more powerful than humans. And this second book, or these spin-offs, what they are mostly is murder mysteries set within this world, where you have the main character who owns this lodge thing, and she very much lives in close connection with the others, even though she is human and the others kind of love her and adopted her. And yeah, I just really enjoy Anne Bishop, and I enjoy Anne Bishop's writing. I really enjoy how she deals with trauma in her book, because our main character in this series is incredibly traumatized. I mean, in the spin-offs and in the series. And that is something that is just very, very conscious. For example, our main character in the series is the survivor of an abusive relationship. And so what Anne Bishop does, for example, is she does not start the romance in the first book. She does not start the romance in the second book, even with the spin-offs. Even though you know there is chemistry there between 2 of the characters, but it's just, you know, all the characters are very, very aware of the trauma that our main character has, and so our main character herself is very aware, and it's just something that I really appreciate about Anne Bishop's writing, how she deals with trauma and with the trauma of her characters. And yeah, so I give it 3.5 stars because, you know, it's not my favorite Anne Bishop book, but it was fun to read once again. The second 3.5 star book I had was Maker's Curse by Trudy Canavan. This is the 4th and last book in the Millennium's Rule series that I will not try to summarize. You basically have a bunch of different worlds, and all those worlds have different levels of magic, and you have 2 characters that come from 2 worlds that are pretty low on magic, and you follow those 2 characters throughout the 4 books. Something that I really enjoy about this series is that each book kind of already is its own finished story and follows its own plot. However, they are very much connected to each other, but I will also once again talk more about this series in a full review video. And so yeah, the thing that I have to say, I really enjoyed. I enjoy Trudy Canavan's writing. Like, she's one of my old favorite authors, so her writing is just very nostalgic to me. And I just love when I have read authors for such a long time and for so so many series, because this is the 4th series that I have now read by her. I think I've now read all her books. I don't know if she published anything since this came out in 2020, but I think I've now read all of her books. But yeah, I just love it when I've read authors for such a long time that I can start recognizing their patterns, like when they build characters and with their plot and everything. And so yeah, that's why I really enjoyed this book as well. Next is my 3.75 star book, and I will also try to keep this one short, and that was God Killer by Hannah Kana. This one will obviously also get a full review. So this one I just really enjoyed. I was really surprised when I got it because it's so short, because it's under 300 pages and it's a high fantasy novel. However, I am actually quite happy that I got this physically and not like as ebook, because obviously I started reading ebooks more this year, because seeing that it was so short, just, you know, I adjusted my expectations of what I was going to get. But first, what is this book about? In this series, gods have become outlawed. And our main character, her whole family, when she was younger, was killed by a god. And since then she has gone around and she has become a god killer. And she has killed every god that she has come across. However, at the beginning of this book, she meets a young child who desperately needs her help. And so she does that. And then also there's a third character that we follow who is, or used to be, a guard to the king. And so yeah, I really enjoyed this because once I saw how short it was, I knew I wasn't going to get like the most complex story or world building or whatever. So I just went into it expecting a like fun, maybe a little bit intense fantasy story, and that is exactly what I got. There's so much inclusivity in this book as well. Our main character has a prosthetic leg, for example. She is also bisexual, pansexual, like she swings both ways, as some people like to put it. And yeah, I just love the found family feeling of our 3 main characters in this book. It was a lot of fun, and as I said, full review will be coming. This was also the buddy read for my book club, which is all about reading adult high fantasy written by women and genderqueer folks. So if you're interested in joining buddy reads, the link to the Discord is down below. In April, we're reading Daughters of Istihar. So yeah, if you're interested in that, join us. The link is down below. 2 more books left. The first is Build Your House Around My Body by Violet Coopersmith, which I gave 4.25 stars. This is magical realism, horror, fabulism, kind of in that vein. And we follow 2, I don't want to say 2 characters, but 2 stories. The one story follows one specific character, and it's about a young Vietnamese American woman who just didn't feel fulfilled in America, chose to move to Vietnam to become an English teacher, does not feel any happier in Vietnam now, and goes missing. And so you follow her in the months leading up to her going missing. The second story is kind of a generational family saga, and it also ends with a girl going missing in the rubber plantation of her father. So the stories of those 2 girls are somehow connected, somehow combined, and that's what we find out in this story. This story is kind of confusing if you don't pay a lot of attention, which, as you know me, sometimes happens to me while I read books. However, even if I didn't always exactly know what was going on, this book absolutely gripped me. I love the writing. I love how, I don't know how to put it, but just bare bones in a way. I don't know if that's the right way to put it. Probably not. And I'm not talking about the writing, but like the way the story was told was just very, not gripping, that just you know, it was words, what are words? Anyway, I absolutely enjoyed this. I don't understand why I waited this long to get to it. There's not really a resolution to the story, so if you need a concrete resolution, I mean, there is a resolution, there is an ending, but like, it's not a satisfying ending. So if you need a very satisfying ending to your story, maybe this one isn't for you. But otherwise, especially if you love stuff that's very magical realism, horror, horrifying elements, kind of unsettling, very unsettling as well, then I think you should try and pick this one up. So the last book I want to talk about in this wrap up is the best book, obviously, I read this month. It is, I think, my 4th 5-star read so far this year. It's a book where I definitely ended up being like, maybe I have to rethink me saying that I typically don't enjoy novellas as much as longer novels, because this was a novella. This was one of the best stories that I have ever read. And I'm talking about The Lies of the Jungle by Moses Oza Utomi, I believe the author was. And I also had an e-arc of this, and I don't really want to say too much about the contents of the story. Basically, you have this city that is called the City of Lies, and the City of Lies has no water. And so children are sent forth to look for water to save the people of the City of Lies. And the main character we follow is one such a child who goes forth to search for water to save his people. And so this story was on my ebook 80 pages long. It wasn't even 100 pages long, which means in print, I guess it's probably even less than 80 pages. This book had me tear up multiple times, and if I hadn't finished it when I was on public transport, I probably would have bawled by the end, because this book just hit me hard emotionally. Also, I just love when, you know, you typically make statements about certain stories and about certain books and why you don't like them, and then you read a story from this genre or from this format and it proves everything you usually say wrong. Because usually I typically don't like novellas because, you know, it's logical. Novellas don't have that much space, and I very much enjoy very complex stories, very complex character building, very complex world building, and a very complex plot. And within a novella, you just don't have the space to do that. Like, that's not a judgment. It's not saying that novellas are worse than novels or anything. It's just saying that novellas a lot of times, or typically, are not able, because of the limitations of their format, to do things that I enjoy the most in stories. This book did all of those things. Tell me, how was an 80-page novella more complex in structure, in story, in themes, in characters than a lot of 500+ page books that I read or that I read? I was just mind blown when I read this. This is one of the most amazing things ever. And I was so happy to finally get ARCs, because I was like, I do not have money this year. ARCs are great. It means I have to buy less books, because, you know, that is one of the very privileged positions that you can sometimes have as a reviewer. Even if, you know, as a reviewer who's not in the UK or in the US, you don't have access to as many ARCs as reviewers there. It's still a pretty privileged position to have. Well, that doesn't work when the book that you read as an ARC is so great that you're like, I need a copy. I need it. It's like a physical need to have a copy of this book. I cannot put into words how amazing this story is. Like, the way the author used words, the way the author used the story, the characters, everything, like the imagery of the story to, you know, say something else and to make the themes clear. It was just absolutely amazing and gorgeous, and it was like in a similar vein in terms of the imagery and the usage of imagery to Nivo. And, you know, her, not novellas, because she doesn't do it quite as much in her novellas, but Nivo in Chosen and the Beautiful and Siren Queen. But yeah, that was it for the books that I read in March. If you have read any of these books and you have thoughts that you want to share, please leave them in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media as well as to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries will be left linked down below, so go and check those out, and I hope I'll see you very soon. Bye!